Discovery has become one of the biggest names associated with educational media, possibly the biggest. I would imagine that most of the followers of this channel have also found value in the Discovery Channel over the years, because when it comes to making educational topics entertaining, they were like one of the originals to do it in a big way. The company was started by John Hendricks, who was able to raise $5 million from various investors to launch a modest cable channel that was only available in 156,000 homes when it officially launched on June 17th, 1985. None of it was original content. John Hendricks had become a big fan of documentaries going back to his days at the University of Alabama a decade earlier, so the channel would mainly show existing documentaries that he had licensed. At the time, John Hendricks said, "Our programming is for what we call lifetime learners, people who maintain a curiosity about the world and who want to come away from a program enriched as well as amused." The idea there was that it probably would not attract a wide audience, but the people it did attract would likely be higher educated and wealthier, which would be attractive to potential sponsors. Well, over the past 40 years, almost exactly, that small cable channel has become larger than anybody could have predicted, and I'm guessing larger than most people realize. It is currently one of the largest media companies in the world that is worth billions of dollars. So in this video, I want to try to convey the size of Discovery while highlighting some of the more significant or more interesting steps that helped it grow so large. Starting off, where else but with the Discovery Channel itself, which you might expect would be the majority of this video, but it is only going to be a small part of it. Within a few months of that launch date, most of the Discovery Channel was sold to 3 different cable companies who helped make it available to more households. Though I do want to point out that founder John Hendricks continued leading the company as CEO until stepping down in 2004, and even then stayed on as chairman of the board until 2014. Back in the 1980s, educational content like this was way less common, so even though everything they showed was already existing, 75% of it never aired on American television before, so I think it was that uniqueness that helped attract its initial wave of viewers. Over the next few years, they started making original shows, and they started airing Shark Week. They noticed that shows about sharks always seem to do really well in the ratings, so to try to raise those numbers in the summer of 1988, they aired a 10-part series called Caged in Fear, and the numbers were double what they typically were for prime time. So they started making that a tradition every year, and by the end of the 1980s, the Discovery Channel was already well established, with about 50 million subscribers. 1996 is a significant year because that is when Discovery expanded by launching a bunch of additional channels that have since evolved into unexpected directions. Going through some of these really quick, one of these channels was called Discovery Travel and Living, probably one of the least eventful ones because it existed mostly unchanged before being shut down in the early 2010s. A much more eventful channel that they started was Discovery Kids. I certainly remember watching them when I was younger. In the early 2000s, they even started showing Discovery Kids content on NBC on Saturday mornings. In 2009, the toy company Hasbro paid $300 million to acquire 50% of Discovery Kids. The network was then relaunched as The Hub, if you remember that, and some of the new shows were designed to promote Hasbro products. In 2014, it was then rebranded as Discovery Family. The company also started Discovery Science in 1996, that has since been renamed the Science Channel, and they started Discovery Civilization. In 2002, the New York Times bought half of that channel to have it relaunched as Discovery Times. Then, in 2008, shortly after the New York Times sold their share back to Discovery, it rebranded yet again as ID Investigation Discovery that would feature mostly true crime type shows. Also, I want to include here that 2 years after the rest of these, in 1998, Discovery started the Discovery Health Channel. In 2011, that was then replaced with OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network, that was started as a 50-50 joint venture with Oprah Winfrey's company Harpo, though Discovery has since bought out most of her shares. I realize that these Discovery branded channels have gone through a lot of changes that can be tricky to to follow, and I promise that things are going to be much more straightforward with the next category on my list, other channels. For this part, I want to talk about some cable channels that Discovery has owned under completely different branding. In 1991, for example, they made their first major acquisition when they bought the Learning Channel. Back then, it had mostly educational programming, so the name was fitting and it made perfect sense to pair it with the Discovery Channel, fitting in nicely with John Hendrick's original mission. However, shows like Trading Spaces that blended education with reality show components have since motivated a shift in the channel's direction toward shows like Toddlers and Tiaras and 90 Day Fiancé. In 1996, they teamed up with BBC to launch Animal Planet, that quickly became popular through shows like The Crocodile Hunter. I mean, that was like a sensation back then. In 2017, Discovery made their biggest acquisition to that point when they made a $14 billion deal to acquire Scripps Networks Interactive. It included the home improvement channel HGTV and its spin-off channel called the DIY Network, in addition to the Food Network and its spin-off channel, the Cooking Channel. It also included the Travel Channel, which oddly enough had previously been owned by Discovery for a decade starting in 1997. Discovery believed that these networks would be a nice fit, not only because they featured mostly non-scripted content, much like their existing networks, but because it was an opportunity to gain a much larger female following that they were mostly lacking through those existing networks. Shortly after that deal, the company simplified its name from Discovery Communications to Discovery and moved its headquarters from Silver Spring, Maryland to New York City. They were now controlling something like 20% of ad-supported pay television in the United States. So I think I have proven that when it comes to cable television, Discovery has become one of the biggest. Though, as I'm sure you are already thinking, that might not be the most promising market. So the remaining categories on my list are attempts to expand beyond cable television, with the next one being retail stores. Very much like Disney and Warner Brothers were already doing, Discovery set out to open a chain of mall-based stores that were mostly intended to promote their media business by selling heavily branded products. In 1995, they started out by acquiring a chain of 11 stores in the South that really seems like it was a perfect fit. I say that because those stores already specialized in selling educational products, and because, amazingly, they were already called Discovery stores. They only had to add the word channel into the name. At the time of that deal, John Hendrick said that he wanted to open as many as 350 of them over the next 2 years, which may have been overly ambitious. Though the following year, they did spend another $40 million to acquire a bigger chain that was then mostly converted into Discovery Channel stores. By 2007, there were over 100 of them found in most US states, but they were losing money. According to Variety, they were losing $30 million each year. Well, Discovery had just hired a new CEO named Dave Zaslav, who was very concerned with cutting costs. Considering that DiscoveryChannel.com had grown like crazy over the past year, where they were selling almost all the same items that were available in those stores, he decided to shut down all 100 of them, and that was the end of it. Honestly, given the state of shopping malls and physical retail in general today, that was probably a smart time to pull the plug on it. My next category on my list is the quickest one, but still significant: sports. Just a few highlights here. In 2012, Discovery acquired 20% of Eurosport, and over the next few years they acquired the rest of it. Eurosport is a sizable group of television channels that are mostly in Europe, and ever since, Discovery has been making major deals to acquire the rights to air sporting events. Most notably, they have become heavily involved with golf, even starting a Discovery Golf division in 2018. That year, they made a $2 billion deal with the PGA to broadcast and stream the tour outside of the US, and then the following year, they started a streaming service called Golf TV that was shut down a few years after. And then, on top of all that, they acquired the magazine Golf Digest. Again, I do not want to go too far into this one, but Discovery has spent a lot of money over the past decade on deals related to sports. My final category is arguably the most impactful one on the list. In 2022, Discovery completed its merger with WarnerMedia. AT&T had acquired it for $85 billion a few years earlier, so it is such a large deal that it can be hard to follow everything that is happening with it. To keep things simple, I'm just gonna say that WarnerMedia consists of the Warner Brothers Film Studio, a bunch of cable channels including CNN, TNT, HBO, and Cartoon Network, not to mention all the DC properties like Batman and Superman. And I want to be clear that this merger was not the equivalent of Discovery being absorbed absorbed into a larger company. If anything, it was more like Discovery was absorbing Warner into their business. They assumed $55 billion in debt through this deal, and Discovery CEO Dave Zaslav was the one put in charge of the combined company. AT&T wanted to better focus on its core business, while Discovery likely saw this as an opportunity to become more competitive with streaming. WarnerMedia had started HBO Max in 2020, and Discovery had launched Discovery Plus at the beginning of the following year. At the time of the merger, the plan was to combine the services, but they ultimately decided against it. But still, they believed that the deal would result in $3 billion in cost savings and give them the rights to a lot of valuable properties. Well, in June of 2025, exactly 8 days before Discovery's 40th anniversary, by the way, it was announced that Warner Brothers Discovery would be splitting apart into two separate companies. Streaming and Studios is the name of one that will include Warner Brothers, DC Studios, HBO, and HBO Max, while Global Networks will include Discovery and most of the other television networks. As far as I can tell, Discovery will be leaving the merger with some new cable channels and a lot of extra debts. And at this point, the future of Discovery really seems to be reliant on the success of Discovery Plus, so we will have to wait and see how everything comes together and if it will be attractive enough to compensate for that extra debt and the falling television numbers. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Discovery? Obviously, there's a range of things that we can talk about here, but I think I am most interested in hearing about your thoughts on the overall story. You know, how a $5 million investment has grown into such a massive business. Do you agree with the steps and the directions that they have taken to grow this large, or do you wish things had happened differently? And finally, I want to know, is this company bigger than you realized? And if so, what specifically stood out to you the most? And any other thoughts you have about Discovery or anything else in this video, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.